Morning, Richard. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah. Shall we start now?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So last time, you remember we started with traditional costing. I think we had just completed that one, and I had just sent you some questions in the morning. But we will look at those questions also after we go through what we call activity-based cost.
Okay.
Let's talk about little bit about activity-based costing. What is it all about? You remember the problem what we had was all the time we need to know whatever the product that we are selling, we need to know the cost. Whatever the services we are providing, we need to know the cost. The direct material cost, direct labor cost, where the costs are directly related to the particular product or service, we have absolutely no problem. We know that part of the cost. But then there are so much of overheads what we incur. Those overheads, the allocation of those overheads to the product is a bit of a problem. And we saw in the absorption costing system, we have a couple of methods. Try to go on the labor hours, trying to go on the machine hours, or on the basis of number of units produced. But then we have these predetermined rates, then under absorption, over absorption, all that. And still we realize that's not the most proper way to allocate that overhead cost, because not that every cost is moving according to the labor hours or as per the machine hours, and therefore that is not right. But 30 years, 40 years back, it was all right because most of the expenses were direct, material, labor, that kind of a thing. But today, we are in a different world altogether, what we call the modern manufacturing world. In this world, we use lot of machinery and particularly lot of computers even in the manufacturing system. So you don't have so much of labor compared to those days. The bulk of the cost, a major portion of the cost is computerized time, which is not very direct, but it is an overhead which need to be allocated a portion to the product, and that is not very easy because we don't have a proper method, and therefore our costing can go wrong. And compared to earlier history, we don't produce mass scale production. That will be one of our next lessons, I think, the world-class business manufacturing. We do in small batch sizes because we are very flexible. We are very adaptable because unlike in the earlier systems, we don't produce 6 months stocks, 3 week stocks. We are moving into just in time, all that kind of thing. That means we are going into very, very small batch sizes. And that means you can't have any standard costing, that is. And actually we use very little direct labor, or I don't say little, less use of direct labor compared to what it was earlier. Reason being, more we use more of computer. Those days, if you want to go to architect, he will take a piece of paper and draw the thing, and he will get his assistants to perfect it. There are a lot of human labor involved. Today, if you go to architect, he will just open the computer and he will take your idea and he will draw your plan. Go to a doctor today. Today, the doctors almost, just last week I took my wife, I saw the doctor spending more time on the computer than on the patient because he diagnoses little things, he puts it into the computer and the computer will give him the report of all the everything, whatever that need to be done. So we can see we are moving into a society where the little manual. You can see your own CIMA exams. Earlier, we used to sit and mark papers of the students for hours and days. They used to pay us, but we used to do it. But today, that era is gone. The computer marks your paper. Straight away, you will know whether you have passed the exam or not. So for CIMA, I suppose the costing of the correction is becoming more difficult, because earlier they knew actually you had to pay so much to the tutor or to the examiner, and that's it. But today the computer cost has to be a portion for the examination cost. That may be a bit of a tough one. So all these things, what happens as basically it has an impact on production cost. More indirect overheads compared to earlier time, more indirect overheads, less direct labor. Earlier, if the overheads are 40% or 30%, today I would say it is 40 and 50 of the total cost, the overhead cost. And therefore, you have to have a better way of allocating these overheads. Your earlier method of going by labor cost or going by the labor hours or going by the machine hours may not be quite appropriate. Reason, we are living in a competitive world, and if we don't know our right costing, we may do wrong pricing, and therefore we may end up either not selling the product or selling the product but not having enough profits because we have done wrong costing. So therefore, there was a need, I think in some 80s, 90s, for a better overhead allocation, better overhead apportionment, and for that purpose, something called activity-based costing came mainly to intervene on the modern business setup, on the modern production cost, to sort of as a solution to do a proper allocation of your overhead cost, and this is what we are going to look at today in activity-based cost.
Okay.
As I said, if you look at the modern product environment, the way we do things are much more different than 40 years back. We use more machines, more computers, small batch sizes, less use of direct labor, and therefore it has more impact on the production costs, more indirect overhead, insurance, depreciation, computer software, all that, little less direct cost, and therefore the traditional costing methods, what we have been adopting, is becoming less useful, and therefore the bulk of the overhead is, the bulk of the production is indirect overheads, and therefore you need to know a better way of allocating. Otherwise you can have wrong allocations, wrong costing, wrong pricing decisions, and in a competitive environment you can just get thrown out of the market. So this is what we call the modern production environment, and because of that some solution was needed. So the traditional costing, we went on a predetermined overhead recovery rate, and that was based on volume of activity, labor hours, machine hours, or unit cost. But now what we find is that is not proper, because huge cost we are going to do on an arbitrary basis, not a proper method, and your decision making can be wrong, and therefore your cash flows can have an impact upon, and therefore generally it is thought whatever decisions we are going to make, it must be based on what we call incremental cash flows. That is, what you have to see is, now I have my computer already. Whether I use it or not, the computer is there. I have to find out, to give tuition to Richard, what are my incremental costs. I should not be worried about my computer, depreciation, all that. It is already there. I must be worried to give tuition, what is the incremental cost. Okay, my electricity bill will go up for 1 hour. Okay, my internet connection charges will go for 1 hour. Those are my incremental costs. And I must charge a fee from Richard that will recover that one and make a profit. If I try to recover everything, I may not get the business in a competitive world. So basically, today we try to make our decision, this is what we call relevant costing, based on incremental cash flow. So the earlier method seems to be somewhat inappropriate to ratings. We go on the incremental revenue, incremental expenses. So very particularly this is applicable for special project. You and I, we have our normal work being done, but suddenly we get a special order. And you may not be able to charge the normal thing what we do, because it's a special order. The customer is asking a special price. So Normally what we do is we allocate the rent, we allocate the factory supervisor's salary, everything. We find the total cost and say the total cost is £100 and we want to keep a £25 profit and we say the price is 125. The customer will say, very sorry Richard, I don't want your services. But if you really look at in that 100, you have included the rent. Rent, whether we do that project or not, is already incurred. Factory supervisor salary, whether we do it or not, it is already incurred. So we can remove those things. Look at the exact actual incremental cost purely because we are going to do that project, how much we have to incur. Okay, it may be 60. Then even if you want to have the profit of 25, you can say we will do it at 85. He will be quite happy to give it to you at 85, but not at 125. That's what the today's world is. You have to make very quick decisions. So this is why today there's so much of talk about empowerment. The lower level managers are given the authority to make decisions at very lower levels rather than coming for everything to the board meeting. I remember 30 years back when I was working, for every little thing we have to go to the board. We can't take any decisions. We have to take it to the board, put a board paper, wait for the board decision and wait and wait and wait to say the customer whether we can do it or not. And customer has not too many options. He will wait. But today if I tell the customer you have to wait for 1 week, he is not going to wait because there are so many other people tapping at his door and therefore you can't wait for board decisions. Therefore at the lower level, people must be empowered to take decisions. So this is the new business thinking. This is the new business world we are living. And you can see the younger generation that is coming up, they want that kind of challenge. They are not prepared to take authority or the command of authority from the top to bottom approach is ceasing very fast. People don't want that kind of a attitude. Even, I mean, you can see it in families. People, the children don't like the parents, trying to dictate them all the time, unlike in our days. So the things are changing so fast, and therefore the decision making will have to be at the doorstep, which is very fast. For that purpose, people should know the cost. People should know how much they can make up, all that kind of thing. So there is very little business secrets, I would say, in the today's business world. Almost everything is known to everyone. Yesterday, the HSBC bank gave me a call and he was asking me something like local rupees, something like 500,000, but it's about 2,500 sterling pounds. He was asking me, do I need a loan? I asked, why? So he said, no, we can give you a loan of 2,500 pounds without looking at any documentation. I asked, what? Yes, he said, yes. If you just ask, I will process it and give you a loan of 2,500 interest rate to be paid in 2 years' time. At a lower level, the people can make decisions. They know their cost of finance. They know what they have to do, all that kind of thing. So because of that, we have to come out with something called activity-based costing. Here, the approach is simply we don't look at the labor hours, we don't look at the machine hours, we look at overhead as a part of an activity. Now, for example, you might have a customer relationship department where people will come and people will talk about their customer problems, whatever they have. So that is an activity that is being conducted by your business. And that activity is an overhead, no doubt about it. But it is not driven by the number of labor hours. The cost is driven by the number of customers visiting or inquiring about your activity. So rather than allocating a portion based on the labor hours, you try to look at that activity and say, wow, it is the number of people who are visiting. So that is what we call the cost driver. We try to allocate a portion, the overhead, not based on the labor hours, traditional, not based on the machine hours, traditional, but based on the activity and what is driving the activity. Now, for example, in a warehouse, there is activity of receiving goods. Receiving goods. There are people, lorries, containers bringing goods. What is driving the cost? If there are 10 containers coming into your compound on a day, your activity will have a certain cost. But if there are 20 containers coming into your compound, you may have to double the activity, and that means double the cost. So you try to look at the activity which is driving. So it is the number of the in orders that you raise. It may be the receptionist. It's an overhead. It may be the number of people that she has to contact. It may be a website. The website cost, it is an overhead. It may be the number of people who come and click your website, because every time when they web, there is a cost to be paid. That may be the cost. So you try to take a more serious approach for your overheads, I would say, a more modernized approach where you like to look at the activities which is consuming and costly. Now, if you look at the hotel, say if a hospital, for example, there are many overheads. One of the overheads will be the operating theater. Operating theater need to be always kept up to date. For that purpose, after every operation, they have to do what they call as new setup. They have to clean and do a setup. So the overhead is not because that you have so many labor hours or machine hours. It is basically the overhead increases with the number of setups. More setups means you have to put more people to work, more maintenance, more clearing, that kind of a thing. So you try to look at every overhead from an activities point of view. This is simply the activity-based costing. Looks very complicated, but don't try to get it complicated. It's a very simple process what we have to look at. Every expenditure is assigned to an activity. Now look at the reception area. Reception area is an activity. What are the expenses for the reception? The reception is salary, right? The telephone that she is using, the floor area what she is occupying, all that is the activity for the reception. So you put all that expenses into one cost pool, and that cost pool is called the reception activity. If you look at reception or operating theater, for example, there will be many expenses that has to go. The operating theater, for example, the people, the laborers who have to do the setup and all that. So labor cost, right? The cleaning, whatever that you have to put and clean. Then the electricity. So everything that is going up is up to what we call a cost pool. And then we see, look at this cost pool. What is driving this cost pool expenditure? It is the number of setups. So this is the cost pool. And driving the expenditure is the number of setups. The more setups, more time you spend on setting up, the cost is going up. And therefore, the cost driver is what we call the setup. So we can find out if the total cost pool for the month is 100,000. And if there are 2,500 setup, we can say for each setup, the overhead cost is 40. So you can see it's not doing it according to the labor hours, it's going by the cost activity. So this is what we do all the time, looking at, and that pool is called the cost object. Cost object. So it is sometimes it is called the cost pool or the cost object, and that is what we do it. And the activity what is driving the cost is called the cost driver. It may be the number of telephone calls. It may be the number of purchase orders that you raise. It may be the number of invoices that you raise. It may be the number of dispatches that you send. It may be the number of setups that you do. All that is what we call the cost driver. Traditionally, everything was measured according to the either units produced or the labor hours. Now the resources will include the materials, the stationery, the telephone, the computer, whatever, the labor, energy, everything, machine depreciation, all that you put it into a cost pool, take the total cost, take the whatever the driver and find out whatever the ultimate cost. So however, many resource exist for activities that are unrelated to the physical volume. So traditionally we were going by the physical volume, but now we realize physical volume is not proper. Rent won't move with the physical volume. Rent moves with the activity. If you have more activities, you need more premises, more rent. For material handling, material procurement, setup, production, scheduling, inspection. Now inspection is also another activity. You might have a cost center to do your cost control department or cost inspection department. More number of inspections you have to do, more the cost of that one. So if you are doing 10 inspections, you probably need only one supervisor. But if you are doing 1,000 costs, you might need more than 10 supervisors, more than 50 supervisors. So that kind of a thing is what we call the cost. So all that we need to be looked all the time, and therefore we need to working out on that basis. So this is what we will be looking later on numbers. So the first procedure, this was this Coop and Kaplan, that is the support activities, that is the cost for the main overheads. So if you look at the finance division, for example, the finance division, there are many activities. One activity may be the payroll. The payroll, if you look at, there are people who have to prepare the payroll, the people, the compute expenditures of maintaining the payroll, the software, all that is one cost pool. And that you can say it is driven by the number of people in the company, because more people you have, maybe more payroll related processing cost. So like that, you have to look at what is the activity that it costs in the end. So it's a simple three-step philosophy. First of all, support activities cost. That is the number one we have to believe. It is not the labor hours that is causing cost. It is not the machine hour that is causing cost. It is the support activity. And the product consume these activities. The products consume these activities. So if you are producing operations, surgeries, you have to do the surgery setup, operation theater. It is going to consume these activities, and the cost should be charged on the basis of consumption of the activity. So this is the simple three-step philosophy that was developed by Coop and Kaplan, and this is what we should be looking. So talking about activity cost is an alternate to product cost, and it's not a new method. Instead of using our traditional costing method, instead of using our marginal costing methods, we can think of using a new, more modernized approach called activity-based costing. So it's a system of absorbing the costing. Now that's the difference between marginal costing and activity-based costing and traditional costing. Traditional costing and activity-based costing both are systems of absorbing overhead cost. In marginal costing, we realize that the overhead costs are not absorbed. It is just charged to the particular period. So both activity-based costing and traditional costing are two methods or two types of costing to absorb your production overheads or fixed overheads. Traditional costing goes on machine hours, labor hours, or number of units produced. The activity-based costing goes based on activities which drives the consumption. So it is a way to allocate the overhead. So what you do is you have a cost pool. Everything is taken into the cost pool, and then you see what is driving the cost of the cost pool, and then everything what is included in the cost pool, including the staff cost, including the stationery cost, including the telephone cost, including the depreciation, everything you put it to the cost pool. Look at the cost driver, what is going to drive that activity, dividing the cost pool by the cost driver, you get what we call cost driver rate. So if I just put it on a little diagram, we have the ABC overhead cost. So the stage 1, we have the cost pool. So there are many things like different cost pools: material handling, procurement, setup. There can be many cost pools, but for convenience purpose, we should not be looking too many cost pools, because then it becomes too many complicated. You have to look at maximum 4, 5, 6, not beyond that one, because it can be very, very time consuming and maybe very detailed, and it may not be worthwhile. So ideally 3 to 6 should be all right. Try to identify your main cost activities. This is what we call the cost activities. And then you look at cost driver for each of these areas. Maybe for material handling, cost per material movement, cost per purchase order, cost per setup. So you look at the total number of material movements, take the total cost divided, you will find the cost per material movement. See the total number of purchase orders divided by the total cost, cost per purchase order, total number of setup divided by the total setup cost, you will get the cost per setup. So this is the way that we work through the ABC. And when we get all that, we have what we call the product cost. The product cost without the direct materials, direct labor, this is actually the product overhead cost, I would say. It's not the total product cost, the product overhead cost. Earlier we took that entire overhead cost, the yellow box, and allocated according to the labor hours or machine hours or whatever. Now that overhead cost is further split into 3 or 4 main activities. Then we look at the cost driver, and according to the cost driver we will allocate, and this is the blue box at the last column is actually the product overhead cost. So one of the main problems will be to identify those activities that consume overhead. It will be totally different from one business to another. Hotel will have a different activities. Hospitals will have a different activity. We must try and find out those activities. So there are 4 main ways. So these are some of the questions you might get in your paper. Logistical transaction. We can look at the number of transactions, like the movement of material. Say the people who are delivering vegetables, they might want to look at the number of kilometers they travel to deliver the vegetables to home. And the cost pool will be the cost of the vehicle, the fuel, the driver's cost, the helper's cost. Those are the cost of that cost pool. And the activity is the number of kilometers they run. So the total cost is 100,000. They have run 10,000 kilometers. They know cost per kilometer is $10. So if they come to deliver to my house and my house is 10 kilometers, they will charge me, their cost for me is $100. That is how they will look at. So logistical transaction, the movement of materials or movement of people. Balancing transaction. So this is basically, it's all about, say, let's look at a buying department. They have to buy raw materials. So that we have to look at the availability of resources. So buying department has to make sure that raw materials are available to make the resource requirements. So the activity is the time that they spend trying to find out the procurement. So they have to spend a lot of time. They may be spending it may be the number of hours they spent on the telephone calls that can become the activity, because they have to give many calls, find out whether it is available here, there, that, all that. So it may be the number of telephone calls or whatever, that will be the activity. So that's the second way we can identify activity. We can look at the quality. So the inspection cost, customer complaints. So these are basically arise because of the quality issues, and therefore you might want to look at from a quality number of quality inspections we do, a number of customer complaints that we handle. That will be an activity. And if you can reduce the number of activities, you can reduce the number of costs. Then the chain transactions, that is basically whenever the customer asks for changes, the changes cost you money. To do various changes, there's a cost of money involved. So you can look at the number of changes. Some customers are very fussy. They might ask 10 changes, and each change is going to cost you money. Put every change into a particular cost pool. Look at the number of changes that you have to make over a period of months or years, and per change, what is the cost? So if a customer is asking 10 changes, you can say that by experience, if you know this customer is a customer who is a very fussy customer, he will be asking 10 to 20 changes. If each change is going to cost you $10, you will, when you are doing his price costing, you will put up a 250 additional charge, because you have to spend lot of money on changes what he is asking. I'm not a customer who is asking for a lot of changes. I just ask very rarely 1 or 2 changes, maybe 2 changes. You will not charge 250 for me. You will charge only 20. So these are the 4 main ways we can identify the activity. One of the big problems in the ABC costing is to find out the activity. So we have to use one of these methods. Mostly we use the logistical to do the activity costing. The next problem is to identify the cost drivers. What is driving cost? So each activity, we have to have a cost driver. Now that is easily said than done. Sometimes there can be, you might have a confusion. There can be many cost drivers for the same activity. So you have to decide what is the best cost driver. Now, for example, transporting vegetables, you might say it is the number of kilometers that they travel. Or sometimes you might say it is the number of lorries that goes out from your warehouse. So you have to decide what is the best possible cost driver. So it is the number of transactions relating to the activity. So I've given you a few examples. For setting machinery, it is the number of setups. Running machines, it is the number of machine hours. So you can go back to your earlier methods. You go the cost of running machines, because we know more hours you run the machine will have more running costs, more overhead, and therefore machine hours is, even though it's a traditional method, it is more appropriate. So remember, it's not that totally we are discarding the traditional method. We still use the machine hours, labor hours. Cost of assembly. There are people who are doing assembling. The cost is driven by the number of labor hours. More laborers you have to work on the assembling plant, you need more overhead. So still the old traditional costing. The difference is you don't do everything on machine hours and labor hours. You try to do setup not on the machine hours, you try to do setup on the number of setup. You try to do ordering not on the labor hours, but number of orders received. You try to do dispatch not on the number of orders, but not on the number of labor hours, number of dispatches. Cost of quality, number of inspection. So like that, you will try to split that overhead, the big overhead figure, into many activities, and many activities you will have many cost drivers. find the best possible cost driver for each activity, and you try to work it through that. Cost driver types. So basically, again, another short question, you might have it in your paper. There are three types of cost drivers. Transaction driver. So here simply we look at the number of transactions. Number of setups, number of batches or materials. This is the most of the common thing what we do, the transaction driver. Sometimes it may be the duration driver. Now, for example, if you look at the hospital surgery, you can't go by the number of surgeries. Appendicitis surgery can take only 45 minutes of your time, but a big kidney transplant can take 8 hours. Heart transplant can take 6 hours. So you try to take your cost driver, not the number of transactions, but the duration, because some are more complicated, it takes more time. So it may be the not the number of kilometers that you travel to supply vegetables, it is the time that you take to deliver the thing. Because some roads are very rough, you might take more time to reach that place. That means more overheads are incurred. Some roads are in the highway, which you can go very fast and deliver, and you might take it based on not on the number of kilometers, but maybe the number of the hours of time. Then sometimes we use the intensity. So rather than, for example, when you look at local orders, the processing of local orders, it's not so complicated as processing of overseas order. So you have to look at the complicated nature of the transaction, and therefore you might think of a different kind of a basis of cost driver. We might think the cost driver is not the number of the hours or the thing. It is much more than that one, and we may have to think in the terms of resources consumed, and maybe we will work out on a weightage or something like that, the package, the kilograms or whatever it is. We may try to work it out on that basis. So these are the three types of cost drivers which we will work it out to find out the cost. There is a kind of a standard 5-step approach. First of all, we will group all the production overheads. Earlier we took one overhead figure and allocated according to machine hours or labor hours or whatever it is. Now we will look at the total overhead, and we will try to split into various activities. So order dispatching, 100,000. Order receiving, 200,000. Setting up a machinery, 400,000. So like that, we will take 3, 4, 5, 6 maximum, I think. And that is the first step you will do. So you have to have a way of identifying the cost, because we will put it everything to electricity, we will put it everything to water, we will put everything as factory salaries. But now we have to go beyond that one and group these overheads into the cost pools. And then you have to find out either based on transactions or duration or intensity, the cost driver. Then you have to calculate the cost driver rate for each activity. And then once you do that one, of course, you have to just say, okay, the kidney operation has taken 8 hours. Per hour, the operating theater cost is $100. So 100 into 8, $800 we must charge it for the kidney operation. Heart operation, 6 hours, 100 into 6, 600. If it is appendicitis operated, it is only 45 minutes, so we will charge only $75. So once we do that one, once we know each rate, we can absorb the activity cost into the product. So there will be many activities going into make a product. If you look at a patient being cared in the hospital, you will have the surgical activity, you will have the nursing activity, you will have the house maintenance activity. You will have to look at different activities. Each of those activities is causing a cost to care for your patient, and all those costs should be added up to find out the ultimate cost of caring for the patient. If you look at a hotel, I think the last case study for operational case study was all about a hotel. Hotel, there are many activities like room services, like restaurant services, like bar services, like housekeeping, like swimming pool. So you have to look at different activities to service a guest. All those activities will have a cost. Restaurant will have to service the guest. The maintenance will have to service the guest. Housekeeping will have to service the guest. So they have to look at all that activity. Room service will have a cost. You have to put all that cost to find out how much Richard is costing as a guest for them. And then they can decide how much they should charge from Richard, keeping a profit for them. So that's the way that we go with the activity-based costing. Finally, this is, remember, the step 1, 2, 3, and 4 will only give you the overhead cost. Now we are saying lot of students stop it at this point and they think that is the total cost because they have spent too much of time on 1, 2, 3, and 4, but they forget there are other costs like material cost, labor cost should be taken together. Then only we can get the full production cost. If you just think that to care the patient, you have only the surgery, operating theater expenses, and you have only the nursing expenses, and only you have the maintenance expenses. That is all your overhead. You have to charge the doctor's expenditure, which is direct labor, and you have to charge all the medicine that the patient consumes as medical expenses. Then only your total cost of the patient will come. So that is why when you go to a hospital, they will give you the doctor charges and also the medicine charges, and then they will say other costs. Other costs are these, all these costs, they will put it up on activity-based costing. So sometimes the examiner might just ask from 1 to 4 and stop it there. Sometimes the examiner might ask for the total production cost. You remember when we were doing traditional costing, we learned two things. There is one thing called full production cost. Then there's something called total cost. To this production cost, you have to add selling and distribution and administration cost to get your total cost. Similarly, in a patient, you will have the overheads, you will have the doctor's cost, you will have the material, the medicine cost, but that may not be the end. There may be still other costs like administration and all that, which is not activity related, but still you may have to charge that one to arrive at the total cost of caring for the patient. When is ABC relevant? So we discussed a lot about ABC, but I think you would have realized ABC is not easy like traditional costing. You need lot of data collection and you need lot of workings to be done. So therefore, ABC, introduction of ABC and working on ABC is a very, very costly process. I remember in 1980s, I was thinking of doing for the company where I was working for a shipping company. I was very crazy. I thought I must introduce activity-based relevant costing. That time, no computers, no software, not even calculators so much. And I used to take big, big papers, put it on the floor, and all over the floor I had papers, and I was trying to work out the activity-based cost for my shipping activity. I found it extremely, extremely difficult. I could not walk on the floor because all over the floor there were paper. But today it's not so difficult because we have got a lot of software. We can do it much, much more faster, much, much more accurately. All the calculations will be done by the computer software. But having said that one, computer software, computers are costly. So we must know when ABC is relevant. Why we had to shift from traditional costing to ABC is the reason is the overheads need to be properly allocated. Earlier, we allocated on machine hours, labor hours. It was wrong. It was wrong to a great extent, but it did not matter because compared to the total cost, overhead cost was only 20%, for example. So 20% going wrong when 80% is right, it was all right. But today we have a situation, maybe 60% is more indirect or overhead. 40% is real direct. So if you wrongly allocate a 60% cost, you might end up with wrong figures. And therefore ABC becomes relevant and relevant and relevant where the indirect overheads are more and more and more as a percentage. So we have to understand it is more expensive to operate and it should be introduced only where it is appropriate, and it is appropriate where the indirect costs are comparatively high relative to direct costs. Where direct costs are 90%, indirect costs are 10%, I don't see any reason why we should go and introduce such a complicated activity-based costing. I remember I worked in a smaller company. There were only 6 people, including me in that company. We were doing recruitment, and my managing director, she was a lady. She has gone for a seminar, a workshop on activity-based costing. Next day, she came and said, "Hey, Kumar, we must introduce activity-based costing in our company." I asked, "What?" So she said, "This super system, all that." So I said, "Here we have only 6 people. We know our cost. Why should we introduce activity-based costing?" So just because your neighbor has introduced, we should not introduce. It should be introduced where the indirect costs are fairly high compared to your direct cost. Product or services are very complex. That is, like hotels, hospitals, they provide different kind of services. It's not a one kind of a service. Even if it's a surgery, it can be a heart surgery, it can be a kidney surgery, it can be something. So the products and services are very complex. That may be time for you to introduce activity costing. Where it is not mass scale product, it is a custom made product. You have ordered a car, a Mercs from the Mercs manufacturer, custom made for you. They may want to use activity based costing to cost your product, the cost your car, because it is taken some extra activity to manufacture your car, and therefore they may go for the activity based costing. Some products are sold in large numbers, but some in small numbers. So you have to look at whether you're selling in large numbers or whether you're selling it in small numbers. So where it is sold in small numbers, it may be in a good position to introduce activity-based costing. So activity-based costing becomes very much significant when we are using for different products or services, and where lot of overheads are being absorbed, more percentage of overheads to be absorbed, and surely the results, the final costing figures you are going to get will be somewhat different or maybe totally different from the same product when you have costed on the traditional basis. Because on the traditional basis, you went on the total overhead on machine hours. But here, you will take the total overhead, split it into different activities, look at different cost drivers, and we'll try to work out on those cost drivers, and the cost can be totally different. So finally, you might realize when we did on the traditional costing, the appendicitis operation, we thought it is going to cost us $1,000. But when we go on activity-based costing, we might find that appendicitis operating is costing only $600 because it is not taking too much of overhead. But a kidney operation, earlier we thought it is going to take $3,000, is now taking $3,800. So you can see appendicitis operation, probably we thought it was 1,000 and we would have overpriced ourselves. And people may not have come to our hospital for appendicitis operation. But kidney operation, even though it was truly costing 3,800, we thought 3,000 and we were doing many kidney operations. Finally, we will see, oh, poor. We are done, but we are not made a profit. So that can happen because your costing is wrong and your pricing can become wrong. So because of that, it should be generally introduced, and once it is introduced, you might find the figures will vary fairly significantly, particularly when the indirect costs are fairly high. What are the advantages of ABC? Surely you will know it gives more accurate costing, more accurate pricing. Then it gives a better understanding of cost rather than thinking everything is driven by machine hours. Now we know the cost is driven by many cost drivers. So we have to see, can we control this cost? What is included in this cost pool? Is this particular cost necessary? Do we need two telephone operators? Can we manage with one telephone operator? You know, the bank started working on this ABC, and that's why they thought it's good for them to introduce this automated telephone call banking facility rather than having many tellers in the bank. Too much of a cost. So they will understand the cost, and that will give better cost control. And you are sure you will have a very much more fairer allocation of cost. I don't say it is a much more I don't say it's 100% accurate allocation, but much more fair allocation of cost. It can be used and it should be used in very complex situations, because simple situations it is not very worthwhile to go through, but can be used in complex situations. Having said all that, I was just talking all the time as if it's a manufacturing, but I took some deliberate examples from hotel industry, from the hospital industry, for you to understand ABC can be applied in service industry too. So this is another famous examiner's question. He might ask whether ABC can be applied in services. Yes, it can be. It is more appropriate for manufacturing because the manufacturing has more overhead. But having said, even service industry today carries a fair amount of overhead because of the use of computers, and therefore ABC can be used even in the service industry. Disadvantages, surely, as I said, it's not always relevant. If your overheads are little, don't try to bother changing the system. Change in any system is a bit of a messy thing, chaotic thing. People don't like it. So don't try to change it unless it is very thing. Still, we have to do some arbitrary cost allocation. So that's what I said. It's not 100% foolproof, accurate, top class costing, because still we have to allocate maybe the rent of the premises, we have to allocate it to the reception area, we have to allocate it to the operating theater area, and one might say, you know, although we are paying a big rent, the ground floor rent is high, and therefore reception should be allocated a bigger square foot rent than the operating theater in the fourth floor. So like that, there can be some disputes, there can be still arbitrary allocation, but I think still better. You have to decide the cost drivers and the activities, not very easy, even though we said it can be very, very complex, and it can be very expensive to operate, because to operate this, you need lot of computer software, lot of expertise, lot of computers. So these are the things that you have to look at all the time. Implications of switching to ABC. Most of the companies are switching to ABC. So most of the time your case studies are on this area, the implications of switching to ABC. The moment you switch to ABC, your pricing can be more realistic. Sales can be more sound because you know your cost very well. So you can have a better strategy. You can market your products knowing your cost very well. You can market your products. Your decision making will surely improve because you go to the market to negotiate prices with a better understanding of cost rather than carrying the old traditional method of saying, cost is this, that, and the other. Your performance measures can be very well improved upon, can be driven upon, because you can tell your people who are working, you can give a target to reduce the cost driver per rate, target to reduce the cost activity rate. You can set up your budgets based on activity, what we call activity-based budgeting. So your management is surely going to be much, much more better than what it is. So I think with that, we come to the end of a very big area on the activity-based costing.
Okay.
So we have done that one. So next session, before we start, I think we are meeting again on Tuesday, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, Tuesday. Before we start on our next session, I think we'll be on, see what it is, our next session is on modern manufacturing systems. But before we start on that one, I have sent you some questions. First 10 questions,
Yep.
I think you can try it because we have done the absorption totally. Even we have done activity based, but try.
I did those.
Yeah, we will meet together. We will look at those questions and then we will move on to the modern manufacturing systems.
Okay, cool.
So I will see you on next Tuesday morning, Richard.
Yeah, see you then. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye.